before the first light ever touched the edge of the sky, when the world was still wrapped in silence and rest, a rooster named Aaron was already awake, standing firm on the highest wooden fence of the farm, feeling the cold air against his feathers and the weight of another day pressing quietly on his chest. Aaron was strong, proud, and disciplined, not because life had been kind to him, but because responsibility had shaped his soul long before comfort ever could. Every morning, he filled his lungs with air and released a powerful crow that echoed across fields, barns, and sleeping houses, announcing the arrival of a new day with unwavering certainty. That sound was not vanity, nor arrogance, nor a desire to dominate the silence, but an act of service rooted deeply in duty. The farmers relied on that voice more than they realized, using it as their living clock, their natural alarm, their invisible guide through routine and survival. Yet humans often resent what reminds them of obligation. Instead of gratitude, Aaron received complaints. Instead of appreciation, he received irritation. Windows slammed shut. Harsh words cut through the air. Stones were thrown without aim, carrying frustration rather than intent. They said his crowing ruined their sleep, never stopping to consider that comfort often turns hostile toward what sustains it. Morning after morning, Aaron endured this quiet cruelty without protest. He told himself that patience was noble. He told himself that service would eventually be understood. He told himself that silence was strength. But exhaustion does not announce itself loudly. It accumulates slowly, settling into the bones, the breath, the heart. One morning, the sky was heavy with clouds, and the air carried an unfamiliar stillness. Aaron crowed as he always did, but the insults that followed felt sharper, heavier, more personal than ever before. Something shifted inside him. Not anger, not resentment, just a deep, consuming tiredness. He climbed down from the fence and walked to his favorite spot, where he could see the horizon stretching endlessly beyond the fields. For the first time, he allowed himself to listen to his own thoughts. He realized that where effort holds no value, proving yourself again and again becomes a form of self-betrayal. He understood that staying where you are constantly rejected slowly erodes self-respect. With calm clarity, he accepted a difficult truth. Leaving with dignity is sometimes the most powerful form of forgiveness. Aaron took a deep breath and crowed one final time, not for the farmers, but for himself. Then he spread his wings and flew away toward the unknown, seeking a place where his presence would be respected rather than resented. That night, the farm fell into an unnatural silence. No voice announced dawn. No sound broke the darkness. Before sunrise, thieves who knew the farm's routine approached quietly, sensing opportunity in the absence of warning. There was no alarm, no awakening call. The animals were stolen one by one while everyone slept. When the farmers woke up, the fields were empty, the barns hollow, and regret arrived far too late. Only then did they realize that Aaron had not only awakened them but protected them. But understanding delayed is often understanding denied. The lesson lingered in the silence he left behind. On the bank of a wide and restless river lived a turtle named Amara, known for his calm nature, quiet strength, and endless patience. Every day, Amara crossed the river, navigating violent currents and slippery stones with steady determination. He did not do this for survival alone. He did it for a friend. That friend was a frog named Tycho, restless, impatient, and full of complaints. Tycho could not swim in deep water, yet he never tried to learn. He assumed Amara would always be there. He assumed help was obligation. For years, Amara carried Tycho on his back across the river. Not once did Tycho say thank you. Not once did he ask if Amara was tired. As soon as they reached the shore, Tycho jumped off and rushed away, leaving Amara alone with his aching limbs and quiet thoughts. Amara believed endurance was kindness. He believed loyalty required sacrifice. But sacrifice without respect slowly turns into burden. One year a drought came. The river level dropped, revealing stones that formed a natural crossing. When Tycho saw this, he leapt off Amara's back without a word and crossed on his own. In his mind, Amara was no longer useful. No goodbye was spoken. No acknowledgement was given. Amara stood alone in the middle of the river, feeling not just the weight of his shell, but the heaviness of years spent carrying someone who never valued him. That night, an old heron landed beside him and spoke gently. "You have the strength to cross the river," the heron said, "but wisdom is knowing who deserves to walk beside you." Those words pierced deeper than any current. Amara forgave himself, not Tycho, but himself for confusing tolerance with love. He released the resentment quietly, choosing peace over bitterness. When the rains returned and the stones disappeared, Tycho stood frozen at the riverbank, unable to cross alone. Amara was already far away, living lightly, free from unnecessary weight. In a forgotten alley near the edge of the city lived a stray cat named Nico. His life was a series of narrow escapes, cold nights, and hunger that never fully left his body. Every morning, Nico sat in front of a luxurious house where an empty bowl rested by the door. Day after day, he waited. He imagined kindness. He imagined warmth. He imagined that one day the door would open. A woman inside the house saw him through the window every morning. She never opened the door. She never filled the bowl. Still, Nico returned, believing hope was loyalty. One freezing morning, a golden cat approached him and spoke softly. "This door will never open for you," the cat said. "You were not born to wait for love that refuses to appear." Nico looked at the door one last time, not with anger, but with clarity. He walked away, choosing dignity over desperation. Forgiveness is not staying. Forgiveness is knowing when to leave quietly. It is releasing yourself from the burden of those who do not value your presence. When you stop knocking on closed doors, your soul begins to breathe again. Those who learn to walk away without hatred never truly lose. Time passed, and the silence left by Aaron did not disappear quickly, because silence has weight when it is born from absence, and absence always reveals what presence once protected without being noticed. The farm tried to adapt using clocks, bells, and routines forced by habit, but none of them carried the same living awareness that Aaron's voice once provided, and deep inside, something essential felt broken, not because the rooster was gone, but because gratitude had arrived too late to matter. Far away from that place, Aaron flew across fields, valleys, and unknown lands, feeling the strange mixture of fear and relief that only comes when one chooses themselves for the first time. Each wing beat felt lighter than the last, as if the burden of being unappreciated had been quietly released into the air behind him. He did not hate the farm, nor did he curse those who had hurt him, because hatred would have tied him forever to a place he had already outgrown. Instead, he carried a calm understanding that not every role assigned by others deserves lifelong obedience. As he rested on distant rooftops and unfamiliar trees, Aaron discovered something unexpected, that the world was wider than the place that once defined him, and that respect often waits beyond the borders of tolerance. In villages where mornings passed without resentment, his voice was welcomed rather than attacked, and for the first time, Aaron felt seen not as a disturbance, but as a presence. This was the reward that comes not from proving worth, but from choosing environments that recognize it naturally. Meanwhile, Amara continued his journey, crossing rivers not out of obligation, but out of choice, feeling the profound difference between carrying because you must and walking because you want to. The memory of Tycho no longer burned inside him, because forgiveness had transformed resentment into wisdom, and wisdom does not cling to the past. Each step Amara took felt deliberate, grounded, and free from the invisible chains that once bound him to responsibility disguised as kindness. He learned that strength does not require endurance without limits, and that generosity loses its meaning when it becomes a one-sided contract. Other animals crossed his path, some asking for help, others offering companionship, and this time, Amara listened not only to their words, but to their behavior, their respect, and their consistency. He discovered that boundaries do not harden the heart, but protect it from quiet erosion. When he rested by the riverbanks at night, he felt peace instead of exhaustion, because peace is what remains when you stop carrying what was never yours to begin with. Far from the alley where he once waited, Nico walked streets he had never dared to explore, guided not by desperation, but by curiosity and self-respect slowly rebuilding inside him. Hunger still visited him, cold still brushed his fur, but his spirit no longer sat in front of closed doors begging silently for acknowledgement. He learned to follow warmth rather than illusion, to recognize open hands instead of staring endlessly at sealed windows. In time, Nico found places where bowls were filled without expectation, where kindness arrived without conditions, and where presence did not need to be earned through suffering. He understood that love delayed indefinitely is not love at all, but a test that slowly drains the soul. Walking away did not make him weak, it returned him to himself. These three lives, though different in form, shared the same silent truth, that suffering for others does not make you noble when it destroys your inner balance, and that forgiveness does not mean sacrificing your future for someone else's comfort. Forgiveness is the quiet moment when you stop explaining your worth to those committed to misunderstanding you. It is the decision to remove yourself from cycles where your value is measured only by how much you endure. Letting go does not announce itself with noise or drama. It arrives softly, like a door closing behind you without anger, without regret, and without the need for applause. Those who truly free themselves do not seek validation from the past, because they have chosen a future that does not require constant justification. If you feel exhausted from giving, it may not be because you lack strength, but because you have been carrying weight that does not belong to you. If you feel invisible despite your efforts, it may not be because you are unseen, but because you are standing in the wrong place. And if your heart feels heavy after forgiveness, then forgiveness may not yet be complete, because true forgiveness always leaves the soul lighter than before. Learn to leave without hatred, because hatred keeps you tied to what you outgrew. Learn to forgive without returning, because returning to what wounded you is not healing, but self-betrayal. Learn to walk away with dignity, because dignity is the quiet confidence that does not need permission to exist. The rooster did not lose his voice, the turtle did not lose his kindness, and the cat did not lose his capacity to love. They simply stopped offering themselves where they were not valued. And in that silent decision, they did not become colder, they became free. Because the greatest power is not endurance without limits, but the courage to let go when staying costs you your soul. If this story touched something deep inside you, it is because part of you already knows that freedom begins where unnecessary suffering ends, and that peace is not found by fixing others, but by finally choosing yourself without guilt. As the understanding of letting go deepened within those who listened to such stories, it became clear that release is not an act of abandonment, but an act of realignment with truth, because nothing that is meant to stay in your life will demand that you shrink yourself to remain useful. Aaron, watching the sunrise from a distant hill, felt no urge to look back, because growth removes nostalgia from places where pain once lived, and clarity replaces longing with gratitude for lessons rather than attachment to wounds. He learned that when you stop forcing your presence, you stop attracting resistance, and life begins to respond with harmony instead of struggle, showing you that effort is only painful when it is misplaced. The mornings no longer felt heavy, because his voice now met open air instead of closed hearts. And in that simple exchange, peace was born without effort. Amara, resting beside a calm stream, realized that boundaries had not made him colder, but more alive, because energy conserved is energy that can finally nourish growth rather than survival. He reflected on how often he had mistaken endurance for love, and how society quietly praises those who suffer in silence while benefiting from their silence. Now he moved slowly, not from burden, but from awareness, knowing that his strength was no longer a public resource, but a personal treasure. The river no longer symbolized struggle, but flow, because flow only exists when resistance is released. Nico, curled beneath a warm shelter offered freely by strangers who asked nothing in return, understood that dignity restores itself the moment you stop begging for what should be given naturally. He saw clearly that hope misplaced becomes self-neglect, and that waiting endlessly is not patience, but fear disguised as loyalty. With every step away from closed doors, he felt closer to himself, because self-respect always waits on the other side of difficult decisions. These stories continue because they live inside every person who has ever given too much, waited too long, or stayed where love demanded suffering as proof. They speak to those who confuse forgiveness with access, kindness with obligation, and loyalty with self-erasure. Letting go is not forgetting what happened, but remembering yourself enough to stop repeating it. It is the moment when you no longer need closure from others, because your own awareness has already closed the cycle. When you stop carrying others, you may feel empty at first, but that emptiness is space, and space is where new life begins. When you stop explaining your worth, silence becomes your ally, because silence no longer hides pain, it protects peace. When you stop waiting for apologies that never arrive, your heart learns how to forgive without reopening wounds. Aaron, Amara, and Nico did not change the world by staying. They changed themselves by leaving, and that is why their stories matter. They remind us that suffering is not proof of love, and endurance is not a moral requirement. They show that self-respect does not shout, does not argue, does not demand recognition. It simply chooses differently. If you are listening to this and feeling resistance, it is because part of you still believes that leaving means losing, but loss only happens when you abandon yourself to remain accepted. If you feel fear, it is because familiarity has disguised itself as safety, even when it slowly drains your soul. And if you feel relief, then you already know that something inside you is ready to be released. Let go not with anger, but with gratitude for the lesson. Let go not with noise, but with calm certainty. Let go not to punish others, but to finally free yourself. Because the one who walks away with peace carries no chains, no debts, and no unfinished business. They carry only clarity, and clarity always leads to a lighter life. And in that lightness, you discover that you were never meant to be a burden bearer, a silent waiter, or an unappreciated guardian of others' comfort. You were meant to live fully, openly, and in places where your presence is met with respect rather than resistance. This is the power of letting go, not as an ending, but as a return to yourself, where peace begins the moment you stop suffering for what no longer serves your growth.